I am Lauren, and I am 35 years old. I used to believe my life was quiet, steady, and finally safe. I believed I had survived the hardest years and earned a calm future. I believed the people closest to me wanted me whole, not broken. I was wrong, and I learned that truth in one single day, when the person I trusted most decided to turn my weakest secret into a weapon. For years, I thought of betrayal as something loud and obvious. I imagined screaming fights or dramatic endings. What I never expected was how silent it would begin, how normal the morning would feel, how gently my life would be pushed off a cliff. The day it happened started like every other weekday, with soft light through my blinds and the familiar weight of routine pressing me forward. My best friend knew everything about me. She knew the parts I showed the world and the parts I kept hidden so deep I barely touched them myself. I trusted her because she had earned it. Or at least that is what I told myself. She listened when I was tired. She laughed when I needed relief. She promised safety when I finally spoke the truth I never shared with anyone else. My secret was not dramatic or illegal. It was fragile. Years ago, I had a mental collapse that forced me to stop my life and rebuild it piece by piece. I recovered. I worked hard. And I became functional again, but the fear never fully left. I feared being labeled. I feared being judged. I feared losing everything I rebuilt if the wrong person decided my past defined my future. She knew all of this. She knew how much it could cost me. She knew how carefully I protected my reputation at work, how much effort it took to appear strong every day. When I told her, she acted gentle and understanding. She made me believe my secret was safe. She made me believe loyalty was permanent. The morning it ended, my phone vibrated before sunrise. One message turned into many. Confusion became dread. My body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and my stomach dropped like it used to in my darkest moments. I opened social media and saw my name spread in places it never belonged. Someone had written about me. Not in concern, not with truth, but with poison. My past was twisted into something ugly. My recovery was framed as danger. My privacy was stripped and displayed for strangers to judge. The words were sharp, calculated, and cruel. I recognized them instantly, not because they were signed, but because they carried her voice. Within minutes, coworkers were watching, friends were whispering, my workplace was tagged, my credibility questioned, my stability mocked. I sat alone in my apartment as my life unraveled in real time. Every notification felt like another nail driven into something I could not protect anymore. I reached for my phone and called her. No answer. I messaged her. Seen. No response. That silence was louder than any scream. It told me everything I needed to know without explaining anything at all. She had chosen this. She had planned it. She had waited for the right moment to strike. My heart raced as my manager called. The tone was careful, distant, and heavy. I was asked to come in immediately. There were no reassurances. There were no answers. Only the certainty that my safe, normal life was slipping away faster than I could stop it. I stood in my kitchen, shaking, trying to breathe, trying to stay upright. I thought about every memory I shared with her, every night I cried and believed she cared. I realized how easily trust becomes leverage when someone decides your pain no longer matters. As I grabbed my keys, another post appeared. This one promised more. It claimed proof was coming. It hinted at future damage, deeper exposure, and final destruction. I understood then that this was not impulsive. This was intentional. She was not done with me. I walked out my door knowing nothing would ever be the same again. I did not know how far she would go, how much she would take, or what would be left of me when the day ended. All I knew was that my secret was no longer mine, and the worst part of the story had not even started yet. By the time I reached my office, the story had already outrun me. I could feel it before I saw it. The way conversations stopped when I walked past, the way eyes followed me, and then quickly looked away. It was like I had stepped into a room where everyone knew something about me that I wasn't allowed to defend. I kept my head straight and my face calm, but inside, Everything was collapsing. I sat in my car for a moment before going in, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. Another share. Another comment from someone who had never met me but felt entitled to decide who I was. I didn't open it. I couldn't. I already knew what it would say. People always believe the most damaging version first. When I finally walked into the building, my manager was waiting. Her smile was polite but strained, like it cost her effort. She asked me to follow her to a conference room. The hallway felt longer than usual, every step echoing louder than it should. I could sense doors closing behind me, not physically, but socially. Something about me had changed, and everyone felt it. Inside the room, she didn't waste time. She told me there were concerns circulating online. She said clients had reached out. She said upper management was asking questions. She spoke carefully, like she was trying not to cut me while still holding the knife. I explained what I could, my voice steady even though my chest felt like it was being crushed. I told her the truth, that my past had been taken out of context and used against me. She nodded, but her eyes didn't fully soften. Then she said the words I had been afraid of all morning. She said they needed to put me on temporary leave while they investigated. She said it wasn't a punishment, just a precaution. But I heard what she didn't say. I heard how quickly trust disappears when doubt enters the room. I heard how replaceable I suddenly was. I left the office without my laptop, without my access badge, without the version of myself I had worked so hard to become. By the time I got back to my car, my phone was vibrating nonstop, family members asking what was happening, old acquaintances suddenly checking in, people I hadn't spoken to in years acting concerned, curious, entertained. My life had turned into a spectacle, and I was the last one with any control. At noon, the second wave hit. A longer post. Screenshots stacked together like evidence. Private details that only one person could have known. Things I had said in confidence, twisted just enough to sound dangerous. The caption claimed it was all being shared for public safety. That lie cut deeper than anything else. She wasn't just hurting me. She was justifying it. I felt something inside me break that didn't feel like panic. It felt colder, clearer. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't gossip that got out of hand. This was revenge. And I still didn't know what crime I had committed. I finally heard from her then. Not a call, not an explanation, a single message. It said she was tired of protecting someone who didn't deserve it. It said people had a right to know who I really was. It said this was my fault for trusting her with the truth. I stared at the screen, reading it over and over, trying to find the friend I once knew hidden between the words. There was nothing there. I typed a response and erased it. I typed another and erased that too. There was nothing I could say that would reach her. She had already rewritten our entire history in her mind, casting herself as the hero and me as the threat. Anything I sent would only be used against me next. As the afternoon dragged on, the damage spread. Invitations were quietly canceled. A volunteer group I helped with removed my name from their site. Someone sent me a screenshot of a thread where strangers speculated about whether I should even be allowed to work. I watched my identity dissolve into assumptions, none of which I could correct fast enough. The worst part was the waiting. Waiting to see what else she would release. Waiting to see who else would believe it. Waiting to see how much of my life would survive the day. Every hour felt like a countdown to something worse. Something final. By the time the sun started to lower, I wasn't just afraid. I was exhausted. Emotionally hollowed out. I had spent the entire day reacting, defending, bracing for impact. And deep down, I knew this still wasn't the end. She had planned this too carefully to stop now. That night, as I sat alone in my dark apartment, my phone lit up one last time. A message from an unknown number. It said she had one more thing to share. Something that would make sure no one ever believed me again. I thought I had reached the bottom by that night. I was wrong. The next morning proved that what I felt before was only the edge of something deeper, darker, and far more permanent. When I woke up, my phone was already buzzing, like it had never slept. For a few seconds, I lay there staring at the ceiling, pretending I didn't know what waited for me, pretending that if I stayed still long enough, the world might reset. It didn't. The message she promised had already been released. It wasn't loud or dramatic. That was the most terrifying part. It was calm, organized, and presented like a final truth. Screenshots arranged neatly. A long explanation written in a steady tone. She framed herself as someone who had struggled for years with the burden of knowing who I really was. She wrote that she had tried to protect me. She wrote that she stayed silent out of loyalty. She wrote that she could not live with herself anymore if something happened and she hadn't warned people. She turned my vulnerability into her moral high ground. Reading it felt like watching someone steal my face and wear it in public. She didn't invent a stranger. She reshaped me just enough to make the lie believable. Every soft moment I shared with her was repackaged as evidence. Every fear I admitted became proof of instability. Every breakdown I survived became a warning sign I supposedly ignored. She didn't just tell people what happened to me, she told them what it meant. And people believed her. I watched comments fill in beneath her post. Some were angry on her behalf. Some thanked her for being brave. Some said they had always felt something was off about me. That one hurt the most. It made me question every smile I'd ever given, every room I'd ever walked into thinking I belonged. I realized how quickly people rewrite the past once they're given permission. I tried to speak up. I made a post of my own, carefully worded, honest, calm. I explained that I had sought help, that I had healed, that my past did not make me dangerous or dishonest. I asked for privacy. I asked for humanity. Within minutes, her supporters flooded it. They accused me of manipulation. They said this was exactly how someone like me would respond. They dissected my words like detectives searching for guilt. My attempt to defend myself only confirmed their suspicions. That was when I understood something devastating. This was no longer about truth. It was about narrative. And she controlled it. By mid-morning, the consequences became real in ways I couldn't scroll away from. My manager emailed to say the investigation would take longer than expected. My access would remain suspended. A client I had worked closely with requested reassignment. The message was polite, professional, and final. Each sentence felt like a door closing softly but firmly. I checked my bank account and did the math in my head. I counted bills. I counted weeks. Fear settled in my stomach like a weight. This wasn't just humiliation. This was survival. What hurt more than the professional fallout was the personal silence. Friends I expected to reach out didn't. People who once told me they loved me stayed quiet. Some unfollowed me quietly, as if erasing me was easier than asking questions. I learned that day how many relationships only exist as long as things are easy. I kept replaying our friendship in my mind, searching for the moment where this version of her was hiding. I thought about the nights she held my hand and promised I was safe. I thought about the times she reassured me that my past didn't define me. I wondered if she had been lying then, or if something in her broke later. Either answer felt unbearable. In the afternoon, she sent me another message. Longer this time. She said she was relieved. She said the truth was finally out. She said she hoped I would get the help I clearly still needed. The words were so carefully chosen they felt rehearsed. She didn't sound angry. She sounded justified. That scared me more than rage ever could. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Every part of me that once loved her felt contaminated now. I blocked her number, not because it stopped the damage, but because I couldn't survive reading another word from someone who knew exactly how to dismantle me. As the day dragged on, I noticed something else happening. People stopped using my name. They referred to me indirectly. That girl. That situation. That person. I was being reduced to a cautionary tale, a story told without nuance or mercy. I was no longer Lauren Bishop, a 35-year-old woman who worked hard and healed. I was an idea, flattened and distorted. That night, I sat alone on my couch, lights off, phone face down. I felt stripped of identity, reputation, and safety all at once. I felt smaller than I had in years. And for the first time since this started, a terrifying thought crossed my mind. What if she wasn't finished? What if this wasn't about destroying my present, but erasing my future too? As if summoned by that thought, my phone buzzed again. A new notification from a platform I hadn't checked all day. Someone had tagged me in a thread titled with my name. And this time, it wasn't about my past at all. By the time that thread appeared, it felt like the day had already lasted a lifetime. I had nothing left in me to brace for more, and that's exactly why it landed so hard. The title used my name again, bold and unapologetic, followed by words that suggested motive, intent, and danger. It no longer sounded like gossip. It sounded like a warning, like a verdict. This time, it wasn't about what had happened to me years ago, it was about what I was supposedly capable of now. The post claimed I had been lying about my stability. It suggested that my silence proved guilt. It framed my attempts to protect myself as calculated manipulation. The worst part wasn't even the accusations themselves. It was how confidently they were presented, like conclusions everyone had already agreed on without me in the room. People piled on fast. Strangers dissected my behavior, my expressions in old photos, my tone in messages they had never received. They decided who I was based on fragments and assumptions. Someone said I reminded them of someone they once knew who snapped. Someone else said they hoped my employer was taking precautions. The language shifted from curiosity to fear, and fear gave them permission to be cruel. I realized then that she had succeeded in changing how people saw me at a fundamental level. I wasn't just flawed anymore. I was a risk. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. Her voice was shaking, trying to stay calm for my sake. But I could hear the panic underneath. She asked me what was true. She asked me why people were calling her. She asked me if I was safe. That question broke something in me. Not because it was unfair, but because it proved how far the lie had traveled. Even the people who loved me most were being forced to question me. I reassured her, even though I needed reassurance myself. I hung up and sat there staring at the wall, realizing how isolated I had become in less than 24 hours. My world had shrunk to my apartment, my phone, and a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. Then came the email I had been dreading. Not dramatic, not cruel, just official. My workplace informed me that my position was being reevaluated due to reputational concerns. They emphasized policy. They emphasized caution. They emphasized distance. I read it 3 times before it fully registered. I didn't have a job anymore. Not really. I had a waiting period with an ending that already felt decided. I thought about all the years I spent proving myself. The late nights, the effort, the pride I felt finally being stable, dependable, trusted, and I felt it all slip away. Not because of something I did, but because someone else decided my past could be repurposed against me. That was when anger finally cut through the fear. Not explosive anger, focused anger. The kind that comes when you realize the destruction wasn't accidental. She didn't just share my secret. She curated it. She released it in pieces. She framed it carefully. She waited for momentum before adding more. This wasn't a moment of weakness on her part. This was strategy. I replayed our last few conversations in my head, noticing things I ignored at the time. The distance. The subtle resentment. The way she asked questions that felt harmless then, but invasive now. I wondered how long she had been collecting pieces of me, deciding which ones to use when the time came. By evening, the damage had spread into spaces I couldn't even see. I was removed from group chats without explanation. A professional contact unfriended me. Someone messaged me anonymously, telling me to get help before you hurt someone. I read that message over and over, stunned by how easily a stranger could reduce my entire existence to a threat. I didn't recognize my own reflection that night. I looked tired, smaller, older than 35. I looked like someone who had been chased out of her own life. I sat on the floor of my living room and cried quietly, not because I felt weak, but because I felt erased. And through it all, she stayed silent again. No more posts, no more messages, She had already done enough. She didn't need to say anything else. She had let the world finish the job for her. That realization hurt more than any insult. She didn't need to keep destroying me. She had handed my reputation to strangers, and they were more than willing to tear it apart. As the day finally crawled toward night, I understood the full truth of what had happened. In one single day, she had taken my privacy, my credibility, my career, and my sense of safety. She had taken the life I built after surviving my worst years and turned it into evidence against me. I went to bed that night knowing I would wake up to consequences I couldn't undo. I didn't know how I would recover, or if I even could. All I knew was this: she hadn't just used my weakest secret. She had used it to make sure I had nowhere left to stand. The morning after everything collapsed, I woke up to a silence that felt unfamiliar. My phone was still. No new notifications. No fresh accusations. No strangers dissecting my life in real time. For the first time since this started, the world paused. And in that pause, something inside me shifted. I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing that I had reached the point where there was nothing left to lose. My reputation was gone. My job was hanging by a thread. My name meant something ugly to people who had never met me. The fear that had controlled me for years, the fear of exposure, had already happened. And somehow, I was still breathing. That realization didn't fix anything, but it gave me clarity. For days, I had been reacting, defending, explaining, apologizing for a story I didn't write. I had let her control the pace, the narrative, and the damage. But silence works both ways. And I finally understood that I didn't owe the world a performance of my pain. I stopped posting. I stopped responding. I stopped trying to convince people who had already decided who I was. Instead, I started documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, messages, the order of events, the edits she made, the lies layered carefully over truth. I wrote it all down, not for revenge, but for accuracy. Because accuracy was the one thing she didn't have. I reached out to a lawyer quietly, not dramatically. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten. I just asked questions. I learned what defamation actually meant. I learned what could be proven. I learned that truth doesn't need an audience to exist, but it does need structure. At the same time, I reached inward. I contacted my therapist and told her everything. Not just what happened, but how close I came to breaking again. We talked about survival, not image. About grounding, not explanation. About the difference between being seen and being understood. She reminded me of something I had forgotten in the noise. My past was not a weapon unless I let someone else decide it was. Days passed. The internet moved on, like it always does. A new story replaced mine. A new villain. A new spectacle. The comments slowed. The messages stopped. The silence returned. But this time it felt earned. I was still dealing with consequences, still uncertain about my career, still rebuilding trust with the people who mattered. But the storm had burned itself out. She never reached out again. I thought that would hurt more than it did. Instead, it confirmed everything. She didn't want resolution. She wanted impact. Once she had it, she disappeared. That told me the truth about her character in a way no explanation ever could. What she never expected was that I would survive publicly and privately, that I would stop chasing validation and start choosing stability, that I would let the noise fade without chasing the last word. She thought destroying my image would destroy me. She underestimated how much work I had already done to rebuild myself once before. Months later, my job situation resolved quietly. Not perfectly, but honestly. The people who mattered listened. The ones who didn't were never mine to begin with. I learned who stayed when things were uncomfortable, and who vanished the moment it cost them nothing to walk away. I am still 35. I am still healing. I am still here. I don't tell this story because I won. I tell it because I didn't disappear. Because betrayal doesn't get to be the final chapter unless you let it. Because the most dangerous thing I ever did wasn't trusting the wrong person. It was realizing I didn't need her permission to move forward. If you're watching this and you've been exposed, misrepresented, or betrayed by someone who knew exactly where to hurt you, I want you to understand something clearly. Your worst moment is not your full story. Your silence does not mean guilt. And rebuilding doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like surviving quietly until the ground feels solid again. She used my weakest secret to destroy me in one day.